to talk about a leadership paradox, which I found interesting, which is actually Russell has kind of alluded to already. But first, I'd like to say that, this is just a few slides as a thought starter, because we're actually here to have a conversation, because a lot of you don't know each other. You're from different companies, and I think you might find it really interesting, in fact, to hear what others are doing and how they're reacting to this particular subject. So this is a thought starter. So in that spirit of it being a discussion, if I could just invite you to bring your kind of shoes off self, because it's really tempting, I think, when you go to these kind of events to feel that you're representing your company. And so you have to sort of present yourself in the Sunday best. But in actual fact, really for these conversations to take off, often it requires some vulnerability. So I think if I can invite you to do that, that would be fantastic. Now, when I think about what's going on as a leader myself and coaching many leaders, I think it's incredibly tough for leaders at the moment. I do think we're in extraordinary times. And when I think about, for example, just AI and how it's affecting our lives, but also probably more just how hard it is to believe anything. It's just incredibly hard. I mean, I'm sure you're all familiar with the SLAM technique. I mean, we have to now check every email to believe in the veracity of the person that's sending you an email. So that's what makes us think that when we think about what leadership's going to be about, so much of it is going to be about legitimacy and trust. And that's, clearly because it's really difficult to know who to trust now. So when it comes to legitimacy, it's also about you want to understand, well, what's got that person to think the way they do. And so with that in mind, I thought, since not all of you know me, just to give you, this is what shaped my thinking about leadership. As you'll know, I am the CEO of Executive Coaching, which I founded 31 years ago. And I'm a master coach with over 30 years experience. I actually have added in here, I was an NED on a PLC board of a company that went from 50 million to it was 3 billion by the time I left. And I did 2 different phases there where I was on the board. So I saw a lot of executive directors in action. I've been at hundreds of PLC board hooters, and indeed I've worked for a number of chairs. So I've got that perspective as well. And as a construction company, so it was a very male environment as well. And I was often the only female in the room. And for the first 10 years of running executive coaching, I have to say I mainly coached men, male leaders, and I didn't really notice. And then I met Emma Spitz. Where's Emma? Emma? And Emma joined us back from JP Morgan. Emma joined us way back with this idea that we should be doing parental transition coaching because she feels that women's leadership journey is being massively disrupted at that point. And so Emma introduced the idea, and not only did it change our business, we're now, as you may know, a global business, 90 coaches. And so not only did it change the company, but it really changed my perspective. I mean, it really was a bit of an epiphany for me. The fact that I could get that far in my career, it was a long time ago, by the way. It was 2005. So we were ahead of the game in spotting even that there weren't many women leaders. But it really changed my perspective. And I think it's made me the gender equity advocate that I think a lot of you know that I've become. And so that led me to writing the book, Coaching Women, Changing the System, Not the Person. And I'm president of City Women Network. And also I host a podcast called Shifting the Needle. So I tell you these things because I'm sure, I'm not in the habit of talking about myself in this way. But I tell you this because I think it's important you understand this is the lens through which I see leadership. So I was saying that I do think as a leader that we're in really, really tough times. And often I find myself thinking, well, we need to do that. Oh, but we need to do that as well. And actually the things we need to do, they don't actually match. They're actually paradoxes. We're all familiar with the VUCA. It's been around 50 years. Well, it's changed, yeah. And now, this is the new VUCA that some of you are all nodding. My husband saw those and read it, and he said, oh gosh, that describes you. She did think it was very nice. So, BANI is the brittle, anxious, non-linear, and incomprehensible world that we're living in now. So just if I can just, expand a little bit, brittle institutions we thought were sacred. I mean, good God, BBC is looking in trouble. And that's like an egg. You think the things that you thought were sacred, overnight, the post office, reputational damage, one thing the chief executive might do wrong. Sorry, Russell. It's always on your mind. You might do wrong. You might go to a Coldplay concert, Russell. And your whole company gets called into question, and your reputation. Now, I think we're an absolute epidemic of anxiety. I think we're all still suffering a bit from PTSD from the pandemic. I think, it really has affected us. And many of you will have children, and you understand that the social media that's helped to, really supercharge anxiety in society today. And leaders are leading that and themselves exposed to it. So that's a big challenge. The other thing is, do you remember the All Saints song? It starts from A to Z. Nothing goes A to Z anymore. It's just a really non-linear world. You can't figure out what you do today will definitely give you that tomorrow. So you're constantly having to weigh up what it's. So that in itself is anxiety provoking. And then it's incomprehensible because the amount of data that we have now is just continues more and more and more. And so therefore it's really hard to see the answer. So that's the world that we're living in. And I think this does lead to these leadership paradoxes that I was telling you about. And here they are. I'll let you read them. You'll read them back. I want to just talk through them. So the humble hero, there are times, I know in the pandemic, when it happened, I, as the leader, you have to make decisions, you have to make a call, and you do actually have to lean into that side. You have to be a bit of a hero. So there are times, there's no question about it, that you do need to. But the other side of it is, because of the complexity of the world, if you don't have the humility to recognize you can't always be right, it's very problematic. So you have to be able to consult and listen and go to others, because you cannot be the hero all the time, because nobody has all the answers. In terms of strategic executor, on the one hand, you have to be thinking blue sky, where are we going, what's the vision, what's the purpose? But equally, you have to be very operational. Yeah, you've got the operational, you've got the day-to-day to run. Traditional and innovative. All companies need to be constantly trying to disrupt themselves. But at the same time, you mustn't throw the baby out the bathwater, because now integrity, heritage, legacy, I'm very proud of our 31 years as executive coaching, because the fact is we've been around, And so then technology savvy and humanist. I mean, ChatGPT, do you know that it was unloaded? It took, I think it was 5 days to reach 100 million users. And it took Netflix it took them 3.5 years. I mean, that is the speed of adoption of AI. And that gives you a measure of the appetite. So you need to be on it. You don't need to be in it, but you need to be on it when it comes to tech. But at the same time, we're all thinking about, well, how do we differentiate ourselves from the robots? So you need to be sure about what's essentially human. In terms of being globally minded, you need to think across the piece, but then something can go wrong in a really tiny part, and you need to act, because that can infect everything. So you have to have that dimension going at the same time as well. And also the high integrity politician. I have had many, actually, leaders come to me, and in the opening session, they might say, Geraldine, I want you to know I am who I am. I like people to accept me as I am, and I don't do politics. And I think, and I have to admit, I often say, well, you will stay where you are, because actually leadership, you have to do politics, because actually politics is actually influencing power, and you need to be able to influence. If you're at leadership, a lot of the job is influencing. And so you have to, on the one hand, be a politician, but as we're all seeing writ large with our politicians at the moment, when you think of Keir Starmer, you also have to have high integrity, which is like, don't go back on your word. So you have to be able to change tack, but you have to stick to where you're going. So you have to stand for something that has to be consistent as well. So these things are challenges. Now, what I'd like to do now is just to get you, because otherwise I'll talk actually all evening, is I'd like you to just to turn a few of you together, just 3 of you at a time, and just talk about this question. We've done that one. Which of these paradoxes are you seeing facing your leaders today in your organisation, or indeed that you feel you're facing as a leader? When you're an executive coach and you're coaching leaders, so much of what you need to understand is the leader needs to be self-aware. Wendy, I think was it you that said self-aware? Self-awareness, by the way, that is someone looking in a little shard of a mirror. And self-awareness is key. You really need to know. And the reason for that, I guess it's kind of obvious, but you're going to have a natural preponderance or preference to these paradoxes. You're going to naturally sit more comfortably. I know I sit more comfortably with the strategy side than I do with I'm laughing because there's so many ECC people here, than I do with the executor, with the operational. I know that for me, a clean sheet of paper and a vision and where we're going and the purpose, etc., and what's out there really interests me. And I've coached many leaders that say to me, oh my God, my worst nightmare is when we do those strategy days. And they're very successful leaders. They're more operationally minded because they find that all, here we go again, round the houses. Let's just get on with the job. So it really is important that you know, and the fact that I know that I'm like that means, of course, I surround myself with people who are not necessarily like that. Yeah. But what I do when I'm coaching someone is I always start with these are Gigi's checklist. So this is what over the years I've found, and it's just my checklist when I'm doing my first exercise, which is a lifeline exercise, because the kind of coaching we do is much more, it's deep developmental coaching rather than issue-based coaching. We're not helping people through just the issue of the day. We're actually helping them to understand themselves and how they face the issues of the day, which I think is... So therefore, when I do the lifeline exercise, this is my checklist of characteristics. I'm looking at... And you can tell from the lifeline, the lifeline exercise where people plot the highs and lows of their career and highs and lows of their personal life and how they interact. And really, they're just telling me their story, yeah? And I'm looking at listening, believe it or not, I don't speak hardly during that session. I know that'll be hard for you to believe. You wanted to get like a notice is how open versus reserved, both how they describe themselves and how they are. Do they describe it in detail or do they describe it more in big picture? I cannot tell you the contrast between what people sometimes present to me. It's just huge. I have had spreadsheets with the last 20 years almost done by year and by what was going right and what was going wrong and beautifully mapped out on a flow chart. And I've had people that come in the scribbled line. Yeah, it's just... So, that's not the only way of defining, but I think it tells you something. It definitely tells you something. When they talk, are they mainly talking about, what they're in charge of, what the task was, or do they talk a lot about the people dynamics, the dynamics in that team, what was going on for them? And so it's just interesting what they choose to highlight, yeah? And the other one that I really noticed is that, I think, obviously, we can be both of these things, by the way, but very rarely do you find someone evenly balanced. Often one is naturally defaulted to one, and then they've added on more of the other, yeah? And so tight, loose, my team would find it hilarious to think that when I was in corporate life as a head of management development, I do have Debbie here who can say, you're always loose. But I had to be much tighter than I am. And in fact, I was. Whereas actually, I definitely, on looks, that's definitely more my free thinking type rather than thinking about when are we getting it done, how we get it done, who's going to do it, etc. So I think I can see that in the conversations that I have as well. And so those are the checklists that I've always sort of looked at. Now, a new one has come in, a new characteristic that I'm looking at, and whether it's a characteristic, is agentic and communal. Funny words, aren't they? So I'm just going to bring them up a bit, because agentic and communal, rather than me describe it, I'd like to show you a little video, because I think this guy says it much better. I do. This guy from Ivy Business School, I think, says it well.
Agentic and communal is something, an area of interest in our colleague and I in the Department of Psychology. We've been working on a project on what do people envision as their like ideal leader and their ideal follower. And there's an activity I like to do with my students, and I've done it with undergraduates and even all the executive MBAs, and you get the same reaction, which I find very, very intriguing. Often before the class, I have them write a scenario down of their ideal, or sorry, their experience with a leader, like a moment where they experienced really good leadership and really poor leadership, and really good followership and really poor followership. And then in class, before we even touch on those, I have a discussion with them about, let's just do a word cloud. Let's, enter anonymously traits that you think of a good leader, bad leader, things of that sort. What you find is that they come up with a lot of these agentic traits, and agentic traits tend to be in our society referred to as masculine traits, but being assertive, being confident, being intelligent, being courageous, being brave, driven, these kind of I'm a person acting on my environment, so I have agency or control over acting on my environment. And you see a lot of these traits pop up when we talk about good leaders. However, when we switch to followers, the language changed to these communal traits, where often we hear things like, we want them to be supportive, we want them to be helpful, and so these examples of these communal traits of compassion, considerate, is what kind of gets associated with followership. What was I find really interesting, and hopefully a good aha moment for my students, is to say, here's the word clouds that we've created based on these terms, but let's revisit your stories. And I have them talk about it, but I also pulled up key moments that I've seen in them. And a lot of those stories are flipped, where they talk about a good leader where I went to work and was having a rough day, and my boss recognized that and said, hey, why don't you go home early, because it looks like you're having some challenges today. You can't focus. Why don't you take care of yourself and come back tomorrow with some renewed energy? Why don't you, a situation where people are in a set of conflicts, I'm going to say, hey, how can we resolve this conflict? I want us to all be able to work together and create this sense of community, which is associated with these communal or quote unquote feminine traits in our society. And that's what a lot of the good leadership examples come from. And then when we talked about good followers, interestingly, they bring up a lot of examples of agency or masculine traits, where they say, I gave someone a task to do and they took it and ran with it. Right, or that they had responsibility for it. They were brave enough to speak up to support another employee who wasn't getting recognized in the meeting. So this kind of behavior from followers, and not saying that one is better than the other, it's just that sometimes our frame of reference and our social norms of what to expect from leaders or from followers, it's heavily driven by this understanding and what we expect then from leaders. So as a society, we say, leaders need to have these masculine, assertive, agentive traits. But is that really true for leadership?
That's what struck me, because when I think I've been in leadership development for a very, very long time, 35 years. And for 50 years, the theory of leadership has been moving towards grafting onto agentic leaders these skills. All of the leadership development, I think it's leaders, it comes around different verticals, leaders coach, how to engage people, how to motivate, how to listen, how to give feedback. They're all the feedback would be the other side, but all these inquiring, listening, empowering, collaborative, those are always the subject of what people are trying to add to their agentic, because the research shows that we over-index on agentic. And what I find quite worrying, actually, is that when I look around the world stage at the moment, and we've got agentic on, superpowered, haven't we? It's agentic with a capital D, despotic. So the thing is, I know that you don't come across. I know that you're not going to have many Putins in your in your teens, etc. That's not the case. But the point is, everyone's seeing that on the television every single day. And so it's actually beginning to penetrate the collective psyche of what leadership is meant to look like. And I've been in New York a lot this year. And what I've really noticed is that the conversations around leadership are definitely tightening up around this 50-year movement towards becoming more communal. I can feel it moving back. And that leads me to my question, which is, and I'll get you to, again, group together and just think about which of the traits do you feel your organisation focuses more on in the way they recognise, reward and promote leaders. Okay, I'm going to call it the end because there's food and drinks waiting for you. And I just want to thank you so much for participating. And if you can bear to hear any more, so On Balance comes out every couple of weeks. And On Balance, and I'm talking about the world of work, talking about a lot of it's about equity, it's about how do you balance these things. And then because I do genuinely believe in having different perspectives, we also have research roundup done by Phoebe, who's actually old enough to like granddaughter. She's not here, so over to her. And Phoebe, very, very smart, and she writes research roundup. So it's so interesting to hear her perspective and what she chooses, because both of them, we give you articles that we have curated, and both of them. So I would encourage you to take a photograph of the and down and please subscribe. Okay, so thank you very much for listening. That's